Hello everyone, welcome back. First week of school for many of us. Otherwise, happy weekend to everybody. Sorry for the delays, thank you very much for joining me tonight. We will be starting off with Kerbal Space Program, and probably best to begin with a bit of a review about what happened last week, so let's sign into the game. So the end of last week, I stopped at a point where I didn't quite know what I was going to use for my science, and if you compare it to the previous video, you'll see I have a lot more, and I've also unlocked a few items. So I made my decisions. Should probably explain what I ultimately went with. I did also catch up with some of the Scott Manley videos, which I had not so much neglected, but had not been able to watch. I still haven't actually finished all of them because of school. But I at least had enough to make some intelligent decisions and something that would allow me to design a rocket not unlike what he did in the videos. So one of the problems is that the video he has is a bit outdated. One of the things that he uses is a fuel line, which is found in the fuel systems part of the branch, whereas all the other parts that are very helpful, things such as, not the cockpit, but the deluxe winglet, stabilizers, which will be all explained when we go into space with this craft, all of them fall under flight control. So I actually needed to unlock 2 branches of the technology tree, both which would give me some items that will allow me to use to do the flight that I was planning. And then after a successful trip, I did have some science left over, so I just put some more into exploration. The reasoning being here that ultimately I'm going to go further inside of this tree with more science. The more scientific tools that I have, the faster I'm going to be able to unlock more. So those were the reasons for the decision. I'm currently sitting on 550, and I'll explain that in just a little bit. So I could actually unlock a bit more, but we have got a goal. We need to have the first Kerbin on what is actually, first Kerbal on one of Kerbin's 2 moons, it turns out. We had orbited the Mun, but there is more than one item. I will also explain this. So here is the system, not unlike our own solar system. Obviously different names for different planets because these bear some correspondence to the real world, but generally they are smaller because the game needs to be fun in addition to being somewhat serious. But if we focus on the planet, we successfully orbited the Mun, but a bit further out there is a second moon called Minmus. This is actually where we're going to be heading first. The distance is quite a bit further than the Mun, but this has the benefit of having lower gravity, which will make a landing a bit easier. Now it is also very mountainous, which can make it a little bit difficult, but of course that's what makes it all the more fun. Before I do that though, I should maybe explain why there's a spacecraft flying. One of the things that I had unlocked in one of the branches was probes. So I no longer need to put my Kerbal's lives at risk in order to conduct science. You can see that there's already been some done here, and there's still more to be done. But the whole purpose of this thing is presently just to float out in space, and one day it is going to hit its point, which is at the apoapsis of the Sun. That will be in 253 days, at which point I will fire my rockets as hard as I can so that it flies into the Sun for the name of science. This is why I like unmanned craft. Let's go back to the Space Center. So I would prefer not to waste time just fast forwarding and hoping that I don't miss that shot, so we have more science that we can do in the meantime. To test this trip that we're going to be making today, I made a ship, and I somewhat regretted not recording it because obviously the principles of the design will probably be a little bit more interesting if I explain it while I'm designing it. Again, this is based off one of Scott Manley's videos, so if you're a fan of this game and you've already seen his videos, there's not going to be a whole lot that's new here. But I liked it. I made a couple of very minor changes, and in the end, it has a couple of features that are largely based off of some problems that we were having in the previous launches when we were trying to get an orbit around the Mun. So I'm just going to start by loading it up. Oh wait, this is a probe. I suppose I could have showed the probe. That's something that I've actually successfully landed with. So to start with, a massive scaffolding to keep the ship on top. That's probably not very surprising. The bottom part is fairly straightforward with a couple of additions which you might have already noticed. In this case, we just have a lot of fuel tanks to blast us up into the atmosphere. And of course, because we are... I might want to change these. Because we are... No, actually, I think those are the ones that I want. Because we are going that much further, and because I'm going to be carrying some more weight than I am used to, I have added more fuel tanks. So in this case here, rather than just having some of these pieces... Yes, I believe we used these the last time. Instead of attaching these, we just made totally separate rockets. We used one of these, which is good for steering, and then we used these, which have a bit more thrust. And effectively, there's 4 fuel tanks on these. Now, there's a couple of other nice things. You will recall, if you watched the previous episode, that I had a problem with some separating tanks ripping off my engines. So we've got a couple of solutions to that. Number one, the separators now have kind of their own little supports. So that's going to be... it'll no longer be so close to the ship when it blasts off. There's also these little things on the end. These are actually separate rockets. So what they're going to do, in addition to the fact that they're already quite a bit out from the kind of the main body of the craft, each of these rockets, there's 2 on each side, are going to fire when I separate these. And so they're going to blow them away from the ship, which adds just an extra little bit of safety, because I do actually have a person inside here now, and I would hate something terrible to happen to them. The design is actually really ugly, and part of that is motivated by a bit of a revelation in terms of how the physics work in Kerbal Space Program right now. You never see ships like this in any NASA videos, and the main reason for that is this is not aerodynamic. Generally, you see them very needle-like, and you'll see I actually removed the cones. A very odd feature of this game right now is that it just simply sums up all of the drag values to represent the how aerodynamic your ship is. And one side effect of that is that even though this is an aerodynamic nose cone, the only thing that this will actually do is increase the ship's mass and the drag. And I understand that there's a mod to make the aerodynamics a little bit more realistic, so a ship like this would actually have some difficulty. But at present, it doesn't actually matter that I have these horrible bits kind of sticking out and just slamming up into the air. So, happy with that. Obviously, a patch will put an end to that nonsense. These fuel lines here are designed to basically keep this center fuel tank as full as possible. So, these are going to burn out. They'll separate, and then I'm going to begin this main area. Once that's burned out, this will separate, and this is the part that's actually going to land on the moon, or actually rather Minmus. Which reminds me, there is a feature that I wanted to add on these. I have been able to bring something back successfully from the ship, but I noticed that these things tend to get banged up a bit. So I feel like I need electricity. I don't know why, so I'll add some there. Yeah, now that I know there's no drag, I tend to make the ships uglier than they need to be. And I'm sorry, I was adding something for a reason, and now I can't remember why. Oh yes, parachutes. So one of the things that I tended to notice was I would be able to take this whole body with me back onto the planet, but there would generally be something that would explode. I'm not entirely sure what. I suspect it's probably one of these solar panels, but I'd really rather not take the risk. So one of the things that I had unlocked in the previous science level was these radial mounted parachutes. I have to assume the reason why is just simply because this craft is quite a bit heavier than just this one what this one parachute can handle. And I've got some space on the side of the ship, so we will just add more, as real scientists do, no doubt. So now I just need to make sure that things are sensible in terms of their order of operation. I still keep something to separate. The main reason here is that if I absolutely need to ditch this lower part of the craft, I still have the option, but I've already deployed my parachutes, so this is more of a safety mechanism so Jebediah, our space traveling veteran, won't die on this trip. But I honestly hope not to have to use this decoupler. The plan is that these 3 rockets are going to get me to the upper atmosphere. This is going to establish the orbit and get me a little bit on the way to Minmus. This upper part is going to take me to the surface and we'll conduct some science. And that part is also going to return to the planet. These are landing gears. This is a light, so it can be a little bit easier. You'll probably remember the mystery goo and the science modules from the previous episode. These are just simply things that I can do while I'm on the planet, or the moon rather. And these are basically something to help me maneuver in space. One of the things I didn't care for a lot in Scott Manley's design was he added another one of these here, and it almost never gets used. But at this point, it's probably not really worth the effort just to rip it out. So if I were to design this again, I'd probably get rid of it. I don't use the RCS that much. But and also one of the reasons he includes it is he just simply takes this upper part back. But I believe in the career mode, which I will eventually start playing, you do get some bonuses for bringing pieces back. The other thing that I need to include, and almost forgot, is this is obviously a very tall craft, and I believe the gravity is light enough that Jeb could probably get back on the ship just by jumping. But I'd rather not leave that to chance, so we'll just do what we've done all the other times and stick something horrible on the side. And let's just make sure. Yep, that runs. So that's just a ladder that'll allow him to get back on the ship. One other great thing that I learned over the week, which is going to be very convenient for the purposes of this cast, is there's custom groups. So if I press the number 1, I can use these science tools of a barometer and a thermometer to collect some science. And that just kind of happens without me needing to click on everything. Likewise for number 2, I've made it so that I lower the legs on the landing struts, and what I'll do as well is actually turn on the lights. Well, turn on and off the lights, or turn the lights on and off. And then I might as well toggle the ladder as well, so basically I just hit the button 2, lights come on, gears go down, ladder comes down, and he's ready to go on a moonwalk, rather than me just kind of individually clicking all of these items and hoping I don't crash into the planet while I am messing around with the controls. So we have everything that we need for our launch. I'm just going to save the updates. This is a really disgusting looking craft with all of these things on the edge. Yeah, I'm not going to bother. Well, perfect. Okay, it's probably worthwhile seeing as it's been a little bit since I've worked on this. We are going to detach from the lower element. We're going to fire all the bottom rockets, which we will throttle up now. The side rockets fire when these decouple the main body, fire the landing rocket, deploy the parachutes, and if things go disastrously as they are wont to do, we separate the part for the pilot. Turn the SAS on, and I believe it is time for Jebediah to be the first Kerbal on the moon, which naturally means we need music appropriate for the occasion. So it seemed to be taking a while to get to the level that we need. I think that might have been because I leveled out a little bit too early, but let's see how far we can go with this. All right, so from the tricks that we learned in the previous episode, we need to turn this into a circular orbit. And the best thing I can do here is just simply launch into my prograde at the apoapsis. So I'm at my highest point now, and I just want to make sure that I don't come crashing back down onto Kerbin. So I'm going to fire in the direction that I'm already going, and that will eventually lead me to a nice circular orbit. I really shouldn't be messing that much with this because I'm going to be leaving it pretty soon anyway. Yep, that's perfectly fine. So a couple of the nice tools about this, it tells me that it'll take me about 7 seconds at the value I was there. So that's maybe one thing I'm a little unhappy about is I've really only got 71 fuel left. I'm basically going to burn a lot of that just so I can establish my circular orbit. Hopefully I will have enough fuel to make it to Minmus. We'll see how it goes. But for the meantime, it's going to take me almost 4 minutes to get to the apoapsis, so we can speed up a little bit just so I can make it a fast trip. Now here, because I already know that I have this RCS fuel, I just turned that on so I can turn myself to the waypoint a little bit faster. It wasn't really necessary because I would have been able to make it in time, but I'm impatient and that gives me a chance to speed up just a little bit while the remaining few seconds sort themselves out. So again, I haven't found a better routine than to just divide the burn time in half. So in this case, I want 3 or 4 seconds on the before I hit the node, and then the 3 or 4 seconds after. So we start firing now. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, this thing's counting down. It kind of gives me everything I need to know, and there we go. So we can get rid of that. And now we have a nice circular orbit around Kerbin. Of course, the drawback is if I were to completely run out of fuel now, I would have no way of getting back down. I guess I could go out and push. But at this point here, I don't have a lot of fuel left to get to Minmus, so I kind of want to make sure that my landing is as efficient as I can make it, which is also a bit of a shame because I'm really not that good at landings like that. So, one of the things that you may have noticed when I was establishing my orbit was when I fire prograde, basically I kind of bulge out the side opposite. So when I was at the apoapsis, if I wanted to make what is now the periapse, if I wanted to make that side go out, I'd make a maneuver here and I'd just fire into prograde. Likewise, if I wanted to make it smaller, I'd fire retrograde. I'm kind of going backwards. I'm lowering my speed, basically. So using that logic, I kind of know where I want to go. I want to go to Minmus, and actually I can set that as a target. And the trick about this is I kind of need to figure out where this this moon is going to be when I reach it. Now, fortunately, the computer kind of gives me all the tools that I need for that. So at this point, this maneuver is just going to be, fire as far as I can to sort of hit this orbit area here. And from that, I'm going to refine it so I actually encounter the moon. I've noticed that sometimes it'll actually show me where the planet is based on my kind of where I'm in the process. So if I were to click it somewhere along here, sometimes it shows me kind of a simulation of where the target's going to be. I haven't found a way to actually enable that. It just sort of seems to happen on its own. Okay. I think I accidentally changed something in this maneuver, so I'm just going to get rid of it and try again. It also wasn't very well placed. If anything, I kind of want to be shooting more towards what's labeled descending node, just because it is going to take me a long time to get there. It's a little too intense. So one encouraging thing here is it talks about its closest approach, and you'll notice that as I slowed down too much, so the closest I'm ever going to get is around here. But if I slow down a little bit more, basically I kind of want to make it close to that apoapsis. So at this point, I'm 78, it looks like 78 kilometers? Yeah, no, 78,000 kilometers away. That's still pretty far. But what is possible is, this is actually very difficult to show, but the idea here is that this orbit, if I take Kermit, well, this isn't the most straight orbit in the world either, but the idea here is even if I had a perfect kind of equatorial orbit, you'll notice it's kind of crooked for Minmus. So I actually need to include that in my calculations for the flight. What I'll maybe start by doing is just try and get the tail of this thing up so that I'm closer to Minmus's orbit. And it looks like I only made problems doing that. Again, there may be more elegant ways of accomplishing this. Yeah, now I'm going way out to nowhere. Ah, I know why. I was upside down when I was doing these. So. Let's try this again. Minmus should be moving counterclockwise, so I should point it here. Oh Lord, the groovy mule, yes, it will. At this point, you've probably already figured out that I have no idea what I'm doing here. I am open to suggestions, by the way, if any of you want to chime in. Chime in sounds a little snarky. I don't mean it that way. But yeah, if anybody would like to offer some advice in terms of these maneuvers, I am very happy to learn, because I like this game, but I just got it, so. Yeah, I sort of figured that going slower on things would be better, but I'm not entirely sure. I mean, at some point I am going to have to cross that large distance between Kerbin, so I just kind of I suppose there's a way to shoot around the Mun, but I'm not entirely sure how you do that and land in the right spot because it sort of seems that you would need to wait for a specific time. But with that in mind, I made a mess of that last one, so let's see what we can do again. I also wasted a lot of fuel in my original launch, so it's probably not going to help me. Okay. You mean out of the orbit that I've established around Kerbin, or as in like as I'm getting out of the atmosphere? Oh, great, thank you. Now, sadly, to a seasoned veteran, this first part is going to look remarkably inelegant, and I'm just going to fire as much as I can to at least get on the right track. And from there, I know it would be better for me to try and get a little bit closer halfway through. I think that's kind of where you're talking about in terms of matters like speed. But unfortunately, I'm really bad at aligning things the way that the waypoints tell me to. So I kind of need to fire one and then do my best after I find the next. So but 909.4 is a lot of fuel. But that's fine. It just gives me the story of a rescue mission if he if he runs out. Oh, I didn't give myself enough time for this. This is now where I realize the danger of streaming a Minmus visit, which is the long stretches of silence in which absolutely nothing is happening. That's probably too far actually, but let's see what we can do to improve it closer in. Yeah, no, I'm not close enough. So for my friends who are not familiar, I am definitely not going to have enough fuel to land. Okay, I'm sorry to do this to everyone. I'm just going to revert because it would be boring to just watch this thing land again, and I'm definitely not going to be able to make it. So, which means I'll also get to do the change I really wanted to do, which was I'll make it look like a monstrosity in every other possible way, but that fuel tank bothered me. Okay, so that's the first time I've seen that. Okay, so after that, costly as far as time is concerned and fuel inefficient and otherwise very disappointing first trial. We're back with the nearly identical spaceship, but we will have new music for launch. Okay, so this is slightly more encouraging than the first launch. Told I should be trying to keep this around 50 seconds, which I don't seem to be doing very well, but my better launches where I actually make it to Minmus, I'm usually around a minute anyway, so I'm not particularly bothered. I was really crooked on this one though, so I don't know if that'll hurt though. And of course, now I realize my folly in removing that RCS tank because I can't be impatient anymore. Okay, so we're in decidedly better shape than the previous time. Getting to Minmus is still a bit of a puzzler, though, so fortunately I don't believe I am upside down like the last time. I am, however, locked on the wrong target. And this is my punishment for playing in windowed mode. So this has some, in terms of trips to Minmus, this has some generally nice properties. I mean, it'd be nice if I could get closer than, I think it said 578, 578 kilometers. But it's also a lot better than the previous one. I still wind up burning quite a bit of fuel, but I also have quite a bit of the tank left over, unlike last time. So the plan, kind of like the last one, except I have more fuel to waste in terrible and inefficient ways, is to at least kind of get on a path to an encounter and then to correct as much as I can later on around the middle here. I suspect if I'm too close, it'll either be too late or I can't put it in proper physicist terms because I know nothing of the natural sciences. But I do tend to notice that a lot of the maneuvers I do tend to be a little bit easier on these nice long stretches in between things. So that is a Wikipedia project for me over the week that I don't stream. But for now, we will of course do it the way that old-fashioned scientists do it, which is try it out and hope that it works. And again, if I could rely on my convention of kind of just cutting a burn in half, it would be nice, but I have a sneaking suspicion that 247 of this liquid fuel is not going to be enough, which is a shame because this is generally desirable. At least in terms of the form that it has. I know if I don't do this properly, it's going to wind up with a weird shape. Well, that's why it seemed like it had a lot more than it did. Okay, well, I'm now in the unfortunate spot of not having as much fuel as I thought I did. we'll make the best out of it. Okay, but this is a nice bit of updated information to get, that it will take me 59 seconds on its own, so I can at least cut it in half and make it a little bit more accurate. That looks nothing like what I want it to. Yep, I really messed that one up. All right. It will at least give me, we'll see whether or not these corrections can be better done in transit. Oh, that's nice. Okay, so I can manipulate this and at least see where these things are going to be going. So right now, in relation to Minmus, I'm not so sure how much of an angle that is, to be honest. But I'm definitely too far out, so I'll start by burning in retrograde. Oh wow. I can get in really close. Alright, so the Groovy Mule. I don't know if that was your tip or not, but that is definitely a lot better than every other time that I've tried to land on this planet. And I think that'll get us into the easier landing spots too once we burn it. So this could actually wind up being a really good mission. But we do have a 2-day wait, and I don't feel like speeding up now. We'll speed up. I'm not quite sure yet why the day has 6 hours. I suspect it's because I'm in between orbits, but I'm not entirely sure where the 6 hours comes from. Again, childhood interest in astronomy does not necessarily translate into the most enlightening commentary on a game such as this. Although, again, I suppose I haven't really been talking about this as much on this stream, but over the course, once I get past, the initial build ridiculous rockets and just generally terrify my astronauts, it's surprising how much, I don't know if I'll say you pick up, but at least some of the stuff in terms of what I actually want to learn when I see some kind of a maneuver or a theorem or just general concept, maybe an identity or something that's relied on for orbital mechanics or any of these other things that are going on inside of the game. I actually genuinely want to learn about the people and some of the science behind what's going on it. And I think where previously maybe I had been concerned about my facilities with mathematics, um, even though it's just economics, I think the nice thing that it's done is it's taught me to focus more on the relationships between variables. And so when people are doing things like calculating delta V's and all of that, I've never taken anything beyond a high school physics class, and even then switched that for chemistry. But I was a little surprised how much I could follow some of the more technical material. So it's I sup- what do you mean by gravity boosts? Oh, is that like slingshotting around an existing like so for instance if I've got my relationship to or what I will have eventually is my relationship to Minmus, and if I just kind of rely on it to shoot me out of its orbit in order to get to where I'm going. Yeah, I was always wondering about that. Um, I always try to I try to make it so I don't immediately go to something like yeah, I'll instead harass people inside my chat. Um, I try to make it so I don't immediately go to an official resource for the first problem that I encounter. I'll at least try and get it indirectly or learn about some relationship. So it's something that it's a maneuver I've been hoping to do, but every single time I think about what is involved inside of it, I break out in hives and just generally am terrified at the prospect. But I suspect when I want to actually get to real places, I'm going to I'm going to need to man up on that. And I completely blew this. Wow, that is really sensitive. Okay, I'm glad that it sorted itself out. I love this idea of it being spastic over Minmus. Okay, and to completely kill the mystery and the wonder of looking at space, there's your space. We might as well just set up our new maneuver here so that we can establish a nice orbit around the planet. Now, I've been told apparently the name for this maneuver is a Hoffman transfer, but unfortunately I do not know who Hoffman is and why he made such a helpful contribution to science. That is again my homework for next week's stream. I apologize for not coming a little more prepared, but school was a bit more involved than I thought it was going to be this term. But I am noticing with these maneuvers, I'm definitely using a lot less fuel than I normally do, which is good because I always waste so much trying to get on the surface. so now I'm trying to do a maneuver that is actually impossible. That's not as close as I'd like, but I think it'll have to do. One very nice feature of a game like this is if I were to ever get a angry letter from 2 Steps to Hell, or, sorry, 2 Steps from Hell, saying please don't use your music or their music for these ridiculous videos. Stanley Kubrick has created a wonderful convention of using classical music for any kind of lunar landing, so I fortunately do not merit the attentions of any kind of legal organization, but if I were, it is very cheap and easy to find music that fits 2001. Although the space music for this is nice, so. That was definitely a bit premature, but that's fine. I can work with what I've got. And it'd be nice if I could to land here, so let's see what that's going to cost me. I think I can afford that. Oh! If I didn't get too hasty. Alright, that is probably... I feel bad, but I really want to try this, so... Oh, you know what I should have done? This is going to be dangerous to do now, but... Yeah, so that was more fuel than I wanted to use, and I accidentally blasted too long, but I think I can still manage this. So I was originally going to try and get some science, but I sort of got focused on other things, so let's see what we can get right now. I like their crew report. So I'm not quite sure at what point I am no longer considered high over Minmus. Although I suspect it'll probably start slowing me down when I am. Okay, now for my comrades who are not familiar with the game here, the trick here about the landing is I'm currently flying both horizontally and I kind of hesitate to say vertically, but in the end it would be ideal to sort of land in this lake bed down here, and I would like to sort of touch down facing straight up. So the first thing I'm going to try and do is burn directly horizontally so I can turn it into a straight down fall. And the other trick about this is I would prefer not to waste a lot of fuel doing this, but sadly you can't always get what you want. So now's a handy time for me to use that hotkey. And the only other dilemma I kind of face is I really can't hit this. I don't think I can be faster than about 6 meters a second. I know I was going down at 10 when I was just using one parachute, and that seemed to be breaking things. So I don't want to blow too much early, because then I'm just going to start crashing back down to the planet again. But I also don't want to be starting too fast, otherwise I'm going to either overcompensate when I'm shooting my rockets, or I'm going to kind of underestimate how much I need and not be using enough thrust when the time comes. I'm also not really perfectly vertical, but I'm kind of hoping that that sorts itself out when I'm in the final approach. And the lights are on, so I should start sort of seeing something when I'm getting reasonably close. I'm going to take the heat off a little bit just to try and bring myself a bit closer to 100. Actually, at this point, I think I should be getting a little closer to the 10s. I think the thing that concerns me is I don't see the lights. But I'm obviously very close, so... Well, if 0 is supposed to be sea level, then apparently I have 500 meters, but... Okay, there's my lights. So I was panicking a little bit for no good reason. And I'm definitely using a lot more fuel than I would like to, but at this point I'm kind of locked into staying alive. And touchdown. That is us on the moon. So we had a little bit of a later start today. I think that is a good time to start the first break. I'm going to take about 3 minutes, just get up, stretch. I encourage everybody to do the same, whoever's tuned in. Thank you very much for coming and watching on Friday, on your start of your weekend. I'm certainly enjoying playing the game, and I hope there's at least some value in seeing somebody who's new to it. I will turn on, well, actually the music's already playing here, so I won't put on any music, but I will be back in 3 minutes or less. Thanks. All right, thank you everybody for waiting, and I'm sorry to see we lost one of our viewers on here, but thank you very much for stopping by. To recap, for those who just tuned in, previously we had established an orbit around the Mun, and we sort of set ourselves a goal of getting somebody on one of the moons, and it turns out that there are 2 moons around Kerbin. This is the one with lower gravity, so we decided to make this our first go. And we successfully landed, and at this point, the job is just to kind of collect the remaining science that needs to be done and head home. The one thing I will absolutely say is the descriptions on Minmus are probably the most charming in the game, or at least of what I've seen so far. In fact, it is one that I think is worth reading. While the material samples were processed, you begin to turn your thoughts on how much Minmus looks like a mint dessert, and you have discovered that you are now hungry. Alright. Well, I believe it is time for Jeb to get out and stretch his legs, and... well then. Oh yeah, no, he's hanging on. Right. Actually, I believe this gentleman needs to turn on his light. I wonder if we can get... well, that is a happy-looking astronaut if I can get it. We'll see if we can get a better shot of Jeb when he is outside. Silhouettes are not exactly the most compelling material. My apologies for landing on the dark side. I think he's happy. Or awestruck. Alright, time to do some science. First of all, no, the most important. We are claiming this for Kerbal kind. Feel a bit like a superhero when you jump into low gravity. Well, clearly we know what we're doing. He was not kidding. Okay, I gotta go bed down. I have actually activated Jeb's rocket pack just because I would rather not have him fly off into space. And let's take a surface sample. The surface seems to consist of tiny crystal-like grains. Very pretty, probably not edible. And that's the moon. So it seems that even though I brought a ladder, I have to jump to get on it. Okay, well, that is I suppose, a slightly anticlimactic moon landing just because everything was so dark. But let's think a little bit about how we get home. We have one advantage at the moment, which would be our low gravity. So we should be able to get up and establish an orbit pretty quickly. The drawback is that we don't have a lot of fuel. 40 is for the entire trip. So I need to find a way, once I am in some kind of an orbit, to get back to Kerbin using as little fuel as possible, because it took me quite a bit to get here. Now, again, there's another advantage that we have, which is as soon as we get into Kerbin's gravitational pull, as long as we go to a point where the atmosphere will drag us down, we'll be in good shape. So I think the strategy that I'm going to try and employ here is I've currently not used any of my monopropellant. So I'm going to use as much of that as I can to try and establish things like a circular orbit. And then when it comes time to do a lot of power, I use as little liquid fuel as I can. So for instance, the initial launch is something that I'm going to need to use liquid fuel for, but to establish the orbit would be something that I use monopropellant for. Now, monopropellant is going to go the opposite direction of what I'm facing, which is one of the reasons why I need to do this I need to use the liquid fuel on the planet or the moon. But after that, as long as I have enough time, I can kind of afford to just use the monopropellant. So let's see how this works. Actually, let's just think one more minute here. Okay, that's the top. Equatorial orbit. Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to figure this out when I'm in space. I'm trying to figure out a way to not have to burn a lot of energy to go back to Kerbin. But we can't do it without going into orbit, so we'll just use as little fuel as possible. Actually, I'll just be outright cheeky and use that. It's a way to get some height. Actually, I think this is a bit wasteful, so... Yeah, you definitely used a lot more propellant than I wanted to there, but at least I've kind of gotten some momentum, so I'm just going to use this to climb up to 20. And then I think I can try and set my entire orbit using this monopropellant. I'm definitely worried about running out of fuel at this point though, because 25 is not a lot. I don't even remember what I had at the start, but that was a very wasteful maneuver that I did. I don't know if I actually needed to go that high, to be totally honest with you, but got what I've got. Well, do what I can. Okay, so at this point, I've got a few minutes, so I think I'll just speed up a bit. The one thing is I can't really afford just to do it directly at the apoapsis, but it would be great if I could just sort of flatten things out as much as I can. And then it doesn't even need to be entirely circular. Oh, it's kind of the opposite way of where I need to go. Okay, you know what? I'll try and make this work. So again, I'm facing retrograde, but the RCS is going to move in the opposite direction of what I need. Okay, it's not quite doing what I want it to. Wait till we're a bit closer. So what I'm effectively doing here is kind of like using the liquid fuel engine in a really cheap way. But at this point, I'm just kind of making a bit of a parabola, and I eventually land back on the surface, which isn't what I want. So I'm probably firing this a little bit too far away from apoaps. But if I do it too close, you know, you can see that I need some time to establish this kind of an orbit. So that's got to be more than enough. Yeah, that is definitely not the prettiest orbit I've ever done, but it does the trick. So one thing I'm thinking is, what if we fired into... Okay, I got to think about that. There's got to be a way that I can kind of fire into this orbit and then sort of move into Kerbin. I really didn't help myself by the shape of this thing, though. Okay, that's looking kind of like something that I want. Okay, what am I doing here? This is sort of the tricky part. So I guess my original idea was try and follow this orbit so that I get kind of caught into Kerbin's influence. But if I do that, then I would hit apoapsis in 39 days, and I would burn in retrograde to get to the planet. After all that, it still wouldn't be enough. So that would need 173 points. Well, okay, that's not the worst thing in the world, actually. And that one would need 61. I mean, that's still a lot, but that's not awful. Let me just think a bit about... So I go out and okay, so I can really do that at any point. What gets me closest? Okay, so assuming I had enough fuel, that would be a maneuver that I could pull off. So let's use the rockets to get me out of that orbit. Actually, 50-second burn I can probably handle. Okay, and that will actually take me on effectively a collision course with Kerbin. That was not nearly as painful as I thought it was going to be. So I apologize. I don't like the fact I've been so quiet on a lot of this, but it's mostly because I'm trying to... That sucks. I didn't have that fully shut off. Okay. Let's see if I can nudge it where it needs to go. Okay, so periaps is 37 kilometers. So yeah, I was trying to figure out what I was doing with that. So I thought there might have been some sense in terms of following the path, but I mean, that just sort of puts me in a big circle around Kerbin. So the next thing I thought was to see how much I could sort of use my existing motion to get there. So I think what I wind up doing is sort of this loop around Minmus on my way to Kerbin. The part I'm not entirely clear on, like basically I need to get out of the orbit, so I shoot out here, and as much as I'd like to sort of show the flight on its own, I am a little curious in terms of how this works. So, I mean, in the end, I think it just sort of used the existing momentum from the orbit. I just sort of push myself outside of that, and I just sort of wind up pulling myself back into Kerbin. But I'm not, again, I'm still not entirely comfortable with all of the particulars of the science of the game. So let's just watch and see what happens. Okay, yeah, so I basically launched myself out of Minmus's orbit. It was enough to get caught inside of Kerbin, which is good to know. So I almost wonder if there's sort of a little bit of a band in any given orbit that I can sort of exploit to get back to Kerbin. And at this point here, it's really just a matter of, you know, waiting for a trip home. I could theoretically even this out a little bit by doing this, but, I mean, what does that really accomplish? It just kind of sticks the nose in the air. This is, however, a really good opportunity to see what these maneuvers do, so that... I mean, that's some semblance of straight, but... Yeah. And then let's just see what would happen if I burned retrograde. Wouldn't make it really any lower, that would just kind of narrow the orbit. So, at this point here, I'm just going to let it take its course. It is going to take me 8 days to get back, so that's a little bit of a pain. But while we're doing that, let's go back and see what... Oof, please don't revert. Oh, and you know what I didn't do? I don't believe I got a crew report in high orbit over Minmus. Let's see what I can find here. Oh, I don't want to throw it away. Yeah, so anything that I neglected to do is kind of lost. So what I am going to do is go to the Space Center, and I just kind of want to check in on the device that I want to crash into the sun. And that's mostly so I can just keep tabs. I mean, I know it's 200 days, but if I don't get into a regular habit of checking in on this thing, it's going to pass its spot. Actually, what I can't, no, I think it's a little late. Yeah, so that would require 6,000 delta V, which is impossible. I wonder if I can take any of the stuff that I've learned from this mission to try and get myself a little bit closer to the place I need. Well, actually, while I'm doing that, let's just see if there's any other science that I can collect. Nothing I can transmit. Yeah, so that'll take more than I can handle. Okay, well, something to think about. This is ultimately the device that I'm going to crash into the sun. I've long since given up any hope on getting it back home. I don't think I have enough power to actually land that thing into the sun. Maybe that's something I should try and do, is build a ship that has enough power to just go directly into the sun. But I'm going to see if maybe I can use this as a bit of an experiment in terms of jumping around planets and just generally being a little bit more efficient in my maneuvers. I'm quite happy about how that Minmus expedition turned out, mostly just because I think when I was at the same amount of fuel on a similar ship, I effectively had to abandon it. So in this case here, there's no possibility of me not getting back to Kerbin, even though things didn't turn out the way that I wanted it to. Now, I did do something dumb. I should probably bring up the landing gear, and should have a long time ago. But fortunately, I don't need to worry about that. So, at this point, there's only really one thing to do, and that's fly. Right, so we're closer to Kerbin after what was effectively a complete time warp. Let's see what's going to happen here. So I'm going to come in around here. I mean, this isn't bad. There's light, there's everything I need. I mean, maybe I'll try and fire the rockets to... Well, we'll see what happens when I get at the 37 mark. Actually, what I think I'll do is I'm going to go into prograde, and I'm going to fire the monopropellant just because I've got so much of it, and I want to see what that does to the orbit. I guess the one thing I'm noticing is I'm speeding up, and I'm 1870 meters a second. It'd be kind of nice if I can not come in so hot, so I'm mostly curious what happens to the orbit, though. Not a ton, it looks like, but if I can sort of assure myself that I'm gonna wind up getting caught into the planet, that would be ideal. Okay, at this point, I think it's just time to take a look and see what happens. Still pretty high. Okay, so the space music finished, which means I'm probably on my way. So now I kind of fire everything again. I mean, if this was a real landing, I have a suspicion I would want to dump all of this fuel as fast as I could. In fact, I'm just going to burn retrograde right now because I'm probably not going to have the opportunity to use the rest of the monopropellant. Does not look as cool when you go prograde into the fire, but lets me use the rest of the monopropellant, so I'm going to do it. And just generally will look like we're in a pretty good spot. We'll deploy the parachutes once this is done. I suspect we'll no longer hit land. And in addition to being the first Kerbal on the moon, it looks like Jebediah is going to be the first Kerbal to return from the moon, which is the accomplishment I was hoping for. Yeah, and definitely in this fireball, this would have been the point I wanted to have used all of my fuel. Ah, well. So I guess the real question is, at what point do I deploy the parachute? Do I try for land, or do I do the safe move and deploy it right now for a water landing? I am pretty sure that's a idle hope. So this landing gear is probably not going to serve any function. However, I would like to protect the science as much as possible, so. Definitely don't want to lose the crew report. So it'd be cool to get some extra science here, but I think I'm pretty much tapped out for everything that I can get, so. Yeah, there is no way I was going to get that land. So we get to see how resistant the landing gear is to a water landing. We also get to see whether or not my inclusion of parachutes was actually a good decision. I don't quite know when they're supposed to deploy. Thank God. Okay, 500. And that's definitely quite a bit more reasonable in terms of speed. I mean, slow for us because there's still 400 meters to go. But I can recall the unmanned craft that I designed to do a min-miss landing wound up being, I think it was hitting the ground at around 7 meters a second, something like that. Um, I could test it. I'd just basically build one of these things and put a parachute only on the top. But the fact that it's at 5, which sort of seems to be the not break anything speed, indicates that the problem was weight. Which I also suppose, I don't quite know what it takes to rip a parachute off, but I certainly am happy that that didn't happen. And as much as I'd love to speed up the game, I do know that that does affect the physics, and there's a lot of very valuable science on here, so we will be patient. This would actually be a good time to talk a little bit about the future plans for the stream, assuming I can get a little bit better commentary going on here. But one of the things, I mean, until I grow in sophistication either of my understanding of the underlying ideas behind this title or get better at the mechanics. Nice. Success. So while we enjoy this moment of solitude before we return to base, one of the things I was planning on was once I've got kind of a point where I can sort of reliably create a ship to do roughly what I want it to, is go into career mode with the two business ideas, one a privately owned space flight firm, whereas one is a government program which is purely oriented towards getting science. And one of the things that interested me was apparently the closer you will land these craft to your original base, the better you'll get in terms of recovery scrap. So there's this neat little idea of a water landing like this would be, almost ideal. Oh, nice. Actually, I do get a pressure scan. So this is ideal because I was able to collect some science, and what if I'm not able to pick up the scrap? Well, so be it. Whereas for the privately owned group, this would be a disastrous landing because I'm not able to recover, X units of scrap or something like that. So a little story like that is quite appealing to me. But I also think it would not be as fun if I was constantly just crashing ships that weren't, really weren't built to do what they're supposed to. So at this point here, it's just kind of getting a little bit of a working model in terms of what works. So that was an absolutely fantastic mission. I mean, I already had about 500 science. I added 558. So in addition to the leftover amounts that I had before, that trip on its own over doubled the amount that I had in there. So that was great. And I suspect I kind of left some. I probably left some material sort of just hanging out, or like I left some material because I wasn't paying attention, basically. But Jeb made it back. We've got a ton of science. There's nothing to be upset about on that mission at all. So let's go and do some R&D. Okay. So my options right now, advanced rocketry, and at this point I'm actually going to see what goes on with these. So radial mount liquid engine doesn't give me any better thrust than so I'm not quite sure how much this gives me in addition to what I already have. The bigger fuel tank is probably So T800 fuel tank, mass of 4.5, drag of 2. So let's see what the current fuel tank gives me. 2.25. So if I put 2 of these things on, it's going to cost me 4.5, and I get 180, 220. .5, 360, 440. So it's, I mean, the claim here is that it holds twice the fuel in a slightly stronger container. I've been building my ships with crashing in mind. Well, not in mind, but like you obviously saw how many parachutes I put on that. So there's nothing I can get from this that I don't, they don't already get from slapping on 2 T400s. So, I mean, if I only have 45 science left over, great. I'll pick that up. Advanced construction. So, I guess that's for a space plane. Some more decouplers. I have no idea what these adapters do. Okay, so that costs twice as much as this, and at least this I get a bigger fuel tank. This looks like more spaceplane stuff. I don't know anything about space planes, so